Frank Turek has a question for non-Christians, a question that I assume he thinks is profound, but only shows his own ignorance and absurdity. So, what is this question? Well, I guess you're going to have to keep watching to find out. Honestly, this video feels really familiar. In fact, I know I've answered a video very similar to this in the past. I got about halfway through, and I had to go look to see if Frank had just re-uploaded a video to his channel or something. But no, it's original content, about as original as Frank gets. It just shows that Frank isn't very original in his thinking, that he uses the same examples over and over and over again. So forgive me if some of this seems like you've seen it before. You probably have. But Frank's question for the non-religious, when you think about it, is really entirely idiotic. It's why he's preaching to the religious and not to a secular audience. Because a secular audience would laugh him right out of the building. So here we go again, addressing Frank Turek and his ridiculous failings.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have a question about sharing God's word without force. I feel like a lot of times when people share their religion, they force down someone's throat. So how would you share Christianity with an atheist that doesn't want to hear about it?
Hey, that's a good question. There are a lot of good questions in these Frank Turek Q&A videos. The problem is that Frank doesn't have any decent answers. So, as usual, I will provide my answer, an answer that Frank would absolutely hate, and then we'll watch Frank make a fool of himself because he's an idiot. So, here's the thing. If someone doesn't want to listen to you, and it doesn't matter what the subject matter is, but if they don't want to listen, don't bother them. Because otherwise, you're just harassing people and turning them off entirely to your message. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who wouldn't mind listening to your religious blather. Look elsewhere. And this goes for everyone. I mean, I don't go hanging out in religious forums or subreddits or anything like that. I think those people are idiots, but I don't go trying to push my beliefs or lack thereof on them. I think they're totally wrong, but I don't go invading their space or trolling their area because I want to convince them they're mistaken. If they come to me, fine. They're asking for my opinion, or at least opening themselves up to my rebuttal. But otherwise, I don't, with the exception of posting a link back to my video if I respond to someone, which I think is just good form, because criticizing someone and not being open that you've done it, that's kind of crass. So at least when I remember to, I will post a link to them, and then I will just leave them alone. I won't go back and complain and post on their channel. But anyhow, what does Frank think about all this?
Well, that doesn't want to hear about it. That's the problem. Here's a question I ask anybody who's not a Christian, especially if we've been going back and forth a little bit, and I notice some resistance. And maybe this is a question, Faith, you can ask your friend too. The question is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
And my answer, as I've said before, is no. Now, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't believe in the demonstrably true things proposed by Christianity. I would. If you could prove that there was a God, I would believe that God was real. If you could prove that there was a heaven and a hell, I would believe there was a heaven and a hell. But the one thing I wouldn't do, at least not with any version of Christianity of which I'm aware, is join the movement and bow down to this God, because the God, at least as proposed by Christianity, is simply a douchebag. It hasn't earned my respect or my worship, any more than, say, Kim Jong-il has. I know he's real, but giving him the kind of adoration he demands? Screw that.
I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people on a college campus. I asked that question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And the atheist will say, no!
Nor should they, given what I've already explained. But the religious, and this isn't just Christians because Muslims try the same thing, but they don't seem to recognize that there's a difference between belief in the demonstrably real and bowing down to worship their God. They are, believe it or not, two entirely separate questions.
Wait a minute. I thought you claimed to be reasonable.
I am. I will reasonably believe that your God is real the second you can prove to me objectively that he's real. That's really all you can have any rational expectation for anyone to do. Because beyond proving that God is real, and let's remember that they've gotten nowhere remotely close to doing that, you would have to further prove that worshiping this moral monster you bow down to is a good thing to do. Not because if I don't, he'll cast me into eternal hellfire, which, here's a little secret, the very fact that you believe that is a really good reason why I would never bow down to this asshole, but you have a lot of work to rehabilitate this terrible deity you follow before I want anything at all to do with it. But the religious don't understand that these are two entirely separate questions that both need convincing answers to.
And yet, I ask you if something were true, would you believe it? You say no. How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. Now, there could be a number of reasons for this. But quite frequently, people don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God.
Hardly. But Frank is entirely off the rails because he doesn't understand the content of the question he's asking, and he isn't paying attention to the subtleties that his question entails. Because Frank isn't a particularly subtle guy. Because what they're really asking here isn't, would you believe in my God, but would you join my cult? And the answer is, unless there's a really good, rationally defensible, morally justifiable reason, why would we ever want to do that?
They want to be God of their own lives. They don't want anybody telling them what to do, and they think God's going to tell them what to do and get in the way of their fun.
Well, that's what you teach, isn't it? I mean, even if this was true, which it isn't, this is the whole of your religion, and you notice how he phrased his question. He wants people to become Christians. He wants people to buy into his theology, hook, line, and sinker. He doesn't see that there's more to it than the claims are true, therefore you should adopt the lifestyle. Because that's really not how this works.
Well, if it's a choice between God and fun, guess who wins?
Reality. Reality always wins regardless of the delusions in your head. If there is no God, if it's all just a mental construct made by the emotionally gullible, it doesn't matter how much you believed or how much you prayed during your lifetime. When the lights go out, that's it. You're dead, and you wasted the only life you actually had on a religious fantasy. You don't get whisked away to a magical happy land because you really believed in it. Reality is what reality is. Reality always wins.
Fun. In fact, those of you who are Christians in here, this is just for you. I want to ask you guys a question. Here's the question. I want you to think of somebody you know who's not a Christian whom you'd like to be a Christian. Everybody got somebody intellectually? Friend, relative, whoever it is. Okay, here's the question. Is the person you're thinking of right now on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know if Christianity is true. Or are they apathetic or maybe even hostile to the Christian message? How many people in here say the person I'm thinking of is on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know.
That would be me. Because at the end of the day, I only care about truth. I don't care about feelings. I care about facts. I care about truth. And if the religious want me to accept their claims as truth, they need to provide objectively verifiable evidence that the things that they believe are factually and defensibly true in the real world. Something they not only cannot do, but they don't even try to do. They like to pretend they have the truth, but when it comes to backing it up, they just stand there looking like a bunch of morons. And it's funny that he only asked this question of Christians because it's only the Christians who would be predisposed to agree with him on this subject, and he knows it because he's playing his audience. Imagine that.
Crickets. Nobody. I saw a half-hearted half hand over here. How many people say the person I'm thinking of is apathetic or hostile? Yeah, look around the room. It's the same everywhere.
Except If you notice, the vast majority of people, at least in that shot, didn't raise their hand for either option. So either most of these people aren't Christians, which I kind of find hard to believe, or they don't buy into your absurd premise, which I would really hope is the case. Or maybe the Christians are just apathetic. I don't know.
We were just in Nashville just a few months back, actually November of last year, with Ravi Zacharias. You guys know Ravi, right?
Yeah, Ravi is a jack-off, just like you.
Whatever Ravi writes, God reads. Anyway, gee, I didn't know that. Anyway, I asked the same question. His audience over 1,000 people. One person said, yeah, relentless pursuit of truth.
Now try asking that question to actual atheists and see what they say, because you purposely excluded the people that you're asking the question about. Funny how that works.
You see, most people are not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest.
That's more true than you know, because that describes how most theists operate. They're not on a truth quest. They don't care about truth. They care about comfort. It doesn't matter if that comforting belief makes any rational sense. It matters only that it makes them feel good. But that's your side, Frank, and you refuse to think critically about that, don't you?
And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. So what you do is you ask them if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If they hesitate or say no, you just pray for them, you just love them, and probably what's going to happen in the future, there's going to be an issue that's going to come up in that person's life. Could be a period of suffering or something that happens to them. Your phone is going to ring and that person's going to be on the other end.
Unlikely, especially if they are a critical, skeptical atheist. All that Frank is really doing here is cutting out the people who are too much work to bother preaching to. The people who aren't going to be swayed by emotional platitudes and empty claims. The people who actually want evidence and are more likely to ask uncomfortable questions to the believer than the believer is likely to ask to them. And as I pointed out before, Matthew 28:19 says to go out and make disciples of all nations. Not to pick and choose which people you're going to devote your time to decide which are the really low-hanging fruit that doesn't take that much work, and ignore the rest. That's not what your own religion says to do. But Frank is kind of a hypocrite, isn't he?
Because they're not going to call their atheist buddy when things are down. What's the atheist going to say? Hey, this stuff just happens. There's no rhyme or reason to anything, right?
Which, in a lot of cases, happens to be the case. That's reality. Deal with it. But your atheist buddy is going to tell you to go get medical treatment, not sit at home and talk to yourself and hope that your disease goes away. Your atheist buddy will probably come and help you rebuild your house without expecting you to be receptive to their message of delusion along the way. Your atheist buddy will understand what it's like to lose someone close to you without filling your head with empty platitudes like, it's all part of God's plan, or you'll see them again someday. Because atheism is realistic. It's not based on some emotionally comforting fantasy. And no, it might not make you feel immediately better about tragedy, but in the long run, it is the only one that will tell you the truth about the world. And more people ought to care about the truth.
They're going to call you a person of spiritual depth. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. They will call you.
Okay, thank you.
All right?
Not if they have a clue, but Frank isn't looking for people with clues. He's looking for people who are emotional basket cases, willing to cling to any absurd claims that makes them feel better in the short term. But those ideas are intellectually empty. They don't actually get you anywhere. And Frank knows that, which is why he's talking to the religious, asking them to theorize what's going on in the heads of the non-religious, instead of just asking atheists what they actually think, because doing so would totally invalidate Frank's absurd apologetic nonsense. And if you think about it, he didn't even answer the question that was asked. If you remember back, she asked what would get the non-religious to listen to religious apologetics. What would get atheists to hear the message of the Christian? And Frank essentially said, nothing, give up, go find easier prey. But that's not a solution. That's just admitting that your beliefs are absurdly weak. such that they won't convince a skeptic of anything, because skeptics will be convinced by evidence, by logic, by critical thinking. All of those things Christians have none of, and Frank knows it. Anyone who watches Frank's videos ought to recognize just how disingenuous Frank is when it comes to the Great Commission. In fact, this goes for pretty much all apologists when you think about it. Go for stupid people who don't ask questions, run away from anyone smarter than you, and pretend you're doing God's work when all you're doing is making yourself look like an idiot. Because at the end of the day, that's what these people are. Idiots. I'm not sure why this is a surprise.